we are very blessed and lucky to have him here as our music director at Congregation Shereth Israel. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jonathan, and he will take us on a bit of a tour in a way that in a way and a light that you might not have ever experienced the organ before. So please stay tuned.
Thanks so much, Toby. So this is really a great opportunity for me. I've been here for 14 years, and it's the first time I've really had a chance to showcase the instrument like this. This is very exciting. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the history of this specific organ. I know at some point Toby also wants to say a few words about the history of Jewish organ music in Germany. But our instrument, as Toby said, came with the building. So the building cornerstone was laid in 1904. It opened in November 1905. The organ contract was signed in January 04 to the tune of $13,010 and was ready to go when the building opened. And there was a big ceremony in December of that year of 05. The organ case, when we talk about an organ case, we're talking about the woodwork, not the pipes necessarily. That's called the facade. But the organ case is the woodwork. And so the case in this particular instrument is actually a continuation of the incredible craftsmanship of the bima itself, which, as you may know, is hand-carved mahogany. And the case, which I'll show you up close in just a second, continues lots of carvings, including carvings that can't be seen by anybody except the organist, so I feel very lucky. The pipes are stenciled. They're not stenciled by the same Italian craftsman that did the stenciling on the walls, but they're stenciled by the organ company, and they're stenciled blue and green, and they're now sort of, what would you call that color? Williamsburg blue now. It's all only because of the dust, on the very fine layer of dust, that they're not a little brighter, but they have been untouched in the 115 years plus, 116 years that they've been in place. 115. And the instrument itself was commissioned by a builder, the most famous builder in the western half of America at the time, named Murray Harris. Murray Harris chose this instrument as one of his prime instruments to spotlight. It was one of the biggest he built, and it happens to be the best and biggest Murray Harris still standing in original condition. There is a Murray Harris at Stanford in the chapel in the back, which is bigger, but it's been changed many times, nowhere near its original condition. So we are lucky to have this. When you read the history of organs in synagogues in the United States, this one is always spotlighted as one of the finest synagogue organs in the entire country. So we are really lucky. Now we have some unusual things that I'd like to show you, and it involves taking a little walking tour. So when I first came here, I'd never seen anything like this, and after being an organist for, 50 years. And in the loft itself, you can see these magnificent carvings up here that you can only see when you're up in the organ loft itself. And the inside is another sort of Thomas Edison look. The organ is turned on and off by this very strange switch that looks like something you might see on a caboose. Here's the console, and the console is made out of oak and also hand-carved very elaborately, more elaborately than almost any American console. So we have 25 stops on each side of the organ, and so those 50 stops each control a set of pipes. Each one stop controls 61 pipes. So it tells you we have about 3,000 pipes inside the organ. And the organ extends up 40 feet tall, way up to the top of the dome, actually. And the part of the organ is placed inside the dome itself. It has sounds from very soft to very loud. Of course, when this building was built, microphones didn't exist, much less speakers. So consequently, if the cantor wanted to be expressive and sing softly, the organist had to be able to play underneath the sound of the cantor. So the organ can be extremely soft in this instrument and also kind of boomy and quite supportive, which you'll hear. The pieces that I'd like to play to demonstrate some of the character of this organ and also character of the season are three. The first one is by Aaron Copland. Aaron Copland is, to me, the embodiment of the Western sound. And the piece is Billy the Kid. It's from the Billy Kid Suite, and it's called Open Prairie. It's a transcription which I created for the organ, and I think it goes very well with the Yosemite window with Moses and Ten Commandments. So you'll hear a sound almost like a stagecoach lumbering along and going from the prairie to the mountains. And so this is Aaron Copland, The Open Prairie, from Billy the Kid.
providing some applause from the from the crowd below.
So you may have heard how the acoustics keep the sound going. And after I finish the piece, especially after a short note like that, the acoustics are to an organ what the sustain pedal is to the piano, and very much part and parcel to the character of how an organ is perceived and how much as it is enjoyed. Organs in a completely dead room tend to be overbearing and unpleasant, and this room is just really wonderful for the sound of this specific instrument. So I'd like to play next a piece by a French composer named Maurice Duruflé. Maurice Duruflé lived from 1907 to 1992, and he composed a fair amount of organ music and some orchestral music and some choral music. And this particular piece is the first movement of a suite, and it's simply called Prelude. So the piece is on medium long side. It's about 9 minutes, and I chose this piece because it's dark, and I chose it. I chose something dark because I felt not only does it help us with introspection, but I think many of us, I speak for myself, are in a period in our lives at this moment with the pandemic where life feels difficult, and the politics situation is very intense and upsetting often, and we kind of don't know where to go, and we're stuck at home, so we don't have a lot of options. But music like this has a way of helping us acknowledge where we are, and even though the piece is dark, it feels as you experience the piece, I think you'll feel that it's uplifting at the same time. Something about it feels like, now I've done that. I feel good, and there's something about this introspection that to me is very, very powerful. So I hope you enjoy the piece. Again, it's called Prelude, and it's by Maurice Duruflé, French 20th century composer. ends in E flat minor. And there's a whole philosophy around keys and what they mean and what colors they each have and what affect they each have. And E flat minor is considered a very, very dark key. And that means there are 6 flats in the key signature. And so the piece has this, sorry, I will look at the camera. The piece has this sense of heaviness, and yet at the same time, I think it conveys an enormous inner beauty that we find when we really spend time in contemplation and introspection. The third and final piece that I want to play for you is an entire sonata, and it's by Felix Mendelssohn. So Felix Mendelssohn, as you may know, is, of course, a composer that broke all kinds of records. He was known not in his lifetime mainly as a composer, but mainly as a pianist and an organist. He toured in England as an organist several times, and after one of his tours in England, they asked him, he was approached by the publisher Novello and said, would you write 6 voluntaries for us that we can publish? Well, Mendelssohn, being a good German, knew nothing about what a voluntary was. That's an English term, so he decided to compose sonatas. They're called sonatas. They're actually not in sonata form, but I think he did it a little bit tongue-in-cheek. The English organists of the early 18th century and mid-18th century and even early 19th century did not have anywhere near the technical prowess of the continental organists, most especially the Dutch and the Germans. And Mendelssohn, coming from the Bach tradition in every respect, including being the successor to Bach's Concertgebouw, to Bach's Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra, which Bach founded, and Mendelssohn later became its conductor. He had a brilliant technique, and so he went to show off his organ technique by composing these pieces that no Englishman was going to be able to play. This is the first of that set. It's the longest of the 4, and the 6 sonatas that he published. I have an especial affinity for Mendelssohn. His yard site is the day I was born. So he died on November 4th, my birthday, and I had the great opportunity of playing his all Bach program on his yard site in Germany, in Hamburg, an organ that Bach himself had dedicated. So I feel this great connection to Mendelssohn. And as you probably know, he comes from a long Jewish family, although he went back and forth with Christianity and Judaism. So that's yet another affinity that I have, since I straddle both those worlds as well, as you know. So this piece, Sonata in F minor, number 1 of this set, is interesting because to me it's a battle of light and dark. Mendelssohn quotes a chorale, a German chorale, and but he only quotes the first 2 phrases. And the phrases are, what God does, that is always the best thing to have done. So in German, was Gott will, das geschehe allzeit. That is the best thing. And it's sort of a very practical notion of life. You'll hear this really strong, bombastic organ sound contrast with this gentle, sweet chorale that keeps coming back and forth. And in the end of the first movement, as if the darkness wins. And then you have an extremely gorgeous slow movement, and that shows off a lot of the different colors of the organ, the sweet sounds, the soft sounds. And then there's a recitative section. So a recitative is, of course, when somebody recites. It's the Italian word for reciting. And when somebody recites a particular text to music, that's called a recitative. In this case, there's nobody singing or speaking, but the organ pretends like there is. And then you'll hear this conversation back and forth, again between loud and soft. But this time, the light the beautiful part wins out, and then the fourth movement is just a big celebration, a big finale that seems to underscore the joy of living. So I hope you really enjoy this piece. It's one of my favorites. It's Sonata Number 1 by Felix Mendelssohn.
Just beautiful playing, and I feel so lucky to be here in the sanctuary where you have this beautiful resonance, this echoing, even after the piece is finished. And thank you so much to Jonathan Dimmick. Really, it's such a pleasure to listen to you and to be able to watch you and showcase your feet plodding along there on the other console there. I thought. We're just going to try and spend a few minutes sort of linking this into how the organ kind of figures into Jewish music history, and then we'll see if we have time for a couple of questions. But thank you so much again to Jonathan, and I'm sure we will get to say goodbye to him before the end of this session. It's such a beautiful instrument, as I'm sure you're all aware. And I don't know if any of you have missed that sound of the organ over the past 6 months, but I certainly reminds me of many amazing high holiday experiences that I've had in previous years. And of course, the other very lucky thing about this instrument is that it was basically built for social distancing. We are very far apart, and Jonathan basically has his own private sanctuary up there. So it's been a very practical way to deal with our social distancing issues, making music for the holidays and making some recordings there. But in terms of German Jewish history, the organ was really the beginning of a split that became the Reform movement of Germany, and of course later would translate to the Reform movement in the US. But in 1810, there was a banker, Israel Jacobson, and basically he wanted to integrate better into German society. He wanted German Jewish services to more resemble Protestant services, and so he introduced an organ to the proceedings in a small school service in Westphalia in Germany. But after that time, it really took off, and there were organs introduced in Hamburg and later Berlin, so that by 1817, really the organ was becoming a vital instrument in a lot of German Jewish worship. Congregational singing and communal singing, which previously it was just kind of the cantor, privately chanting to himself, but communal singing and hymnal singing was becoming more important to Jews. And so we have this period where there are responsa written. A responsum in Hebrew, a she'elah, is basically a question for the rabbi. So, whether it's how long do I have to wait to eat my cheesecake after my hamburger, or is this okay to do on Shabbat? There are all these questions throughout history, almost definitely since the Talmud. We have records since the 6th century in Cairo that people were sending these questions to the rabbis in Egypt, which was a great learning center at that time. But we have modern responsa, and particularly reform responsa, and actually this responsum of 1818, which was published in Romania, by Eliezer Lieberman. It was called Noga HaTzedek, or the brightness of righteousness, and basically dealt with this question of whether it was okay to have an organ on Shabbat. And this Talmudist, Eliezer Lieberman, he sided with the new nascent reformists who felt that it was okay to have an organ on Shabbat. And I believe that at the time, all the organists were Gentiles, were non-Jews, and the people who were pumping these machines, these were all hand-pumped organs. They were Gentiles as well. And so the ruling was that it was okay to have these amazing new instruments in synagogue. And then we did get some pushback. There was an argument in Dessau, in Altona in Germany, signed by 22 prominent rabbis in Hamburg, that said, "Ele divrei habrit." So these are the words of the covenant, basically renouncing these innovations in synagogue worship and saying, no, there is absolutely no way that you should have an organ in synagogue music, and really pushing back against the reformers. So here we have, from this kind of innocent she'elah, from this innocent responsum about the organ used in worship by non-Jews in a synagogue or in a synagogue setting. We have the birth of Reform Judaism and all that entailed in Germany, congregational singing and having a priest who would officiate a service or a rabbi who would officiate instead of the rabbi kind of being a teacher figure, having the cantor and the rabbi face the congregation and sing congregationally. These were all innovations that came out of Germany and later translated to our Reform Judaism in the United States. So those are just some of the ways that the organ really shaped kind of German Jewish culture and later United States Jewish culture. We have many famous organ choral composers. You'll hear many of them this high holidays, but I just wanted to give us some context. I think we have time for one or two questions. If anyone would like to speak up or put a question in the chat.
This instrument has been lovingly cared for for 115 years, and we are in the process of probably a 3 or 4 year phases of organ repair. So, like anything that's 115 years old, it's showing a little sign of age. You might be hearing this little sound, which sounds a little bit like blowing a blade of grass between your thumbs, and that is caused by a leak in the bellows, which only gets worse over time, and so that much of the leather is original to 1904. So it's pretty amazing that it's lasted this long, and we are continuing to care for it. It's a beautiful instrument. It's beloved by organists, and many people want to hear it. So my hope is to, once we get it so it's not making buzzy sounds, that I do some recording on it and really let the whole world hear how amazing this instrument is.
Absolutely, thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing it in person at sometime in the foreseeable future. And we're just so grateful that clearly Jonathan was trained in the German school where he is able to play these amazing virtuosic works and showcase them for us. So thank you so much for your virtuosity, for your musicianship, and for your artistry. And so wonderful to have these recitals. I know it's not the same as being live, but I think there's something special about knowing that Jonathan has put this together for us, and this is our sanctuary, and I think it's a wonderful way to build towards the holidays. And with that, we will stop there. I'd like to thank Peter Bonos. Thank you so much, who has organized all this amazing high-tech recording equipment and video equipment so that we're able to see multiple angles of the wonderful instrument. Thank you again, obviously, to Jonathan and Gordon for assisting to put this together. And we will be back again next week showcasing the wonderful new Yamaha grand piano over there. And we look forward to another kind of mini recital and some information about the history of Jewish concert pianists. So please join us again next week at 6 p.m. And Gordon, any other announcements or anything that we should be mentioning?
Oh, well, they're numerous and sundry. But the important thing I would highlight for people is do take time to register for the High Holiday services. We'd really love to have your current best email address on file for that. And you can cruise on over to our website, sherethisrael.org /high holidays to find where to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much again, and we will hopefully see you on Shabbat or for Rabbi Phelps's Talmud study tomorrow evening.
Thank you all very much for coming. It means a lot to me to be part of this and to be part of this community and to have you all here watching and participating in this way best we can at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Erev Tov, and enjoy the rest of your evening.